Hello and welcome everyone to this METATOPIA panel on the distinction and contrast between pass-fail play and open-ended play. I'm going to be your moderator for this discussion. Um, First of all, I just really very quickly need to define the terms here in case you're not familiar with them because I kind of made them up. In pass-fail play, this is how we're going to define it. In pass-fail play, the players are attempting to achieve victory and avoid loss according to the rules. In open-ended play, victory and loss are matters of perspective and not covered by game rules. And for the most part, this ends up being a distinction between role-playing games and other kinds of games, but there are always exceptions to those. We can get into those a little bit. But before we actually get into it, let's introduce everyone in the panel discussion today. Beth, would you like to start? Tell us who you are, what you do, how we can find you, and where you stand on the issue of pass-fail play versus open-ended play.
So my name is Beth Rimmels. I've been a game designer and a freelancer in the game industry for longer than I want to admit. My day job is I'm a marketing professional. I also review games for N-World, and you can find me on Twitter at Beth Rimmels, Rimmels, or my gaming account is at awesome, the number 8, followed by the letter S RPG, so awesome 8 RPG. When it comes to pass fail versus open-ended games, both have their value and both have their place in game design, where you're talking board game design or RPG design. I don't feel like one is inherently better than the other. And in fact, one of my passions I was mentioning earlier to Joan and Darren is growing the base of gamers and growing the base, especially of RPG players. And so sometimes in doing that, meeting them where they are and taking advantage of these two different play styles can help facilitate that.
Great. Okay, Darren.
My name is Darren Watts. I'm a game designer and writer full-time. I also run the panel and seminar track here at Metatopia, so happy to stick myself onto panels that sounded interesting to me to be part of the discussion for. I am both mostly known as an RPG designer, but actually my biggest recent product, my biggest recent game, is a card game based on We Rate Dogs, the Twitter account. And so I do have some experience kind of on both sides of this. And I guess as far as the question, I think it is mostly a question of style. I don't think at the absolute kind of like core elements that this is actually a dichotomy at all. And I believe that story games in their own way, or games, open-ended games, are frequently just redefining what passing and failing means. So I kind of disagree that it's a fundamental split so much as it's a stylistic split, and I think that that's something we can talk about as we go along.
Excellent. My name is Joan Moriarity. I've been a designer, author, art director, publisher, and a lifelong player of games of nearly all kinds. Spent the last decade working at Snakes and Lattes Board Game Cafe here in Toronto, helping guests to choose, learn, and play games of many different kinds. I've also been a professional role-playing GM for a couple of years, focusing mainly on first-time role players. And I've just recently started a YouTube channel designed to help bring more people into the hobby and have more fun playing games. You can find it by searching for Joan the Games Mistress on YouTube. Though they will try to tell you that Games Mistress is 2 words, do not believe YouTube's lies. Games Mistress is 1 word. They probably hasn't been used all that much since the
Scandalous.
Victorian era, so it's fine. My therapist has forbidden me to interact with anybody on Twitter or Facebook, but you can message me on Twitter at jgamesmistress. And all right, so let's get started. Who would like to begin talking about what's good about open-ended play? What it is that makes it special and makes it something that is inviting and good for new players?
Darren, do you want to dive in?
If you want, sure. What's good about it? Wow, it's a unique art form. It is it's an experience that you can't really get doing pretty much anything else. The entire concept of collaborative storytelling in a kind of like an ephemeral circumstance. It dates back. It's connected to our love of theater, but it basically kind of like redefines a lot of like the fundamental concepts of theater, because the audience is also the contributors at the same time, right? Like, I mean, it's unless you're talking about something like actual play, which I think frequently deforms role playing by actually like making it a performance in front of in front of an audience that's not actually participating at the same time. I think the full participation of everybody who is involved in the story is kind of like a key component that I miss when I'm seeing it done in other places. But I think it is it's an experience when it is successful, and even when it is occasionally less than successful, it is still something that it scratches an itch that you can't get at any other way.
Beth, you've been working to bring more people into the world of games and play, particularly in the world of RPGs. So, what are some things about play that doesn't have to concern itself with victory and loss that you find are particularly useful for that purpose?
An interesting way to look at. See, I look at from when I'm trying to introduce somebody who has never touched a role playing game, knows nothing about it. I usually explain an RPG as we're playing pretend at the table because everybody has done that at some point in their lives. You know, when you were a little kid, you played pretend for something. So that's something they grab a hold of. And then basically explain that an RPG just simply establishes some kind of guidelines to make sure that it's fair, because it's going to break down very quickly if you're playing pretend and say I shoot you and I say I refuse to fall down. You know, that doesn't really go anywhere. So that's kind of where I start with explaining to people if they know absolutely nothing. If they know a little bit of something about role playing games, I approach it from a different angle. But if they know absolutely nothing, I'm starting from that. We're just playing pretend, and that is the ultimate. When we were little kids, open-ended game, game design. Well, not so much design to it, but it's an open-ended situation. So I'm trying to get them to tap into that memory, that history, and then just giving them a little bit of a dynamic as to where to go. Now, the game I've been designing does put more of a framework on it, and superficially, it could be argued it does have pass fail conditions for individual things, but it's also designed with a campaign approach, which I tend to look at campaigns as, yes, you may pass or fail in a task or in a given aspect of the plot, but in the big scheme of things, it's about the grandeur of the plot and the open-endedness of the plot. It's not about did you just win that battle. It's about were you having fun and were you satisfied.
I
Does that
think
make
that
sense for your question?
I think it very much does, and it speaks to what Darren was saying about how the distinctions between the two may not be as clear cut as we make it out to be, because even in an open ended game, there will still be successes and there will still be failures when it comes to various different things that happen. It's only the overall structure of it, the closure of it, the conclusion, the fact that this is going to end either in success or failure, which really distinguishes the two types. And I contend that that can actually have a very profound effect on players' experience of it throughout, and not just at the ending, because the question that this is leading up to is rarely far from people's minds. To me, the most remarkable and most powerful thing about open-ended play is what it offers that pass-fail play doesn't to the same degree is agency and control over the nature of your experience. The fact that the question of whether you have done well or done poorly is entirely down to you. And this isn't something that's necessarily exclusive to RPGs either. There are board games we're starting to see now again these days in which victory and defeat are not clearly defined by the rules, but something that the players sort of have to decide after it's over whether or not there's something that happened. And similarly, RPGs have in the past had scenarios in them that are very much pass-fail, like the 1991's Amber Diceless by Eric Luchik. There was a Throne War scenario that started at the very beginning, and it's like, okay, you have to kill the rest of your siblings and take the throne. If you do it, you win. If you don't, you lose.
Mm-hmm.
And that was
And
very, very daring for 1991.
Sure, absolutely.
and I would argue that one of the challenges with getting people, new into RPGs and everything else, and also helping to encourage people to become new GMs, is getting them past the mindset of that it's win-lose, and especially that the GM wins if they kill the players. Because
Something you
that
run
to
into a
me is
lot?
I've run in not so much in my own personal gameplay, but the horror stories out there. Well,
I was
when
going
they
to
came
say,
to
hopefully, generationally, that's a thing that like people have gotten are getting over. I think it is a very common, um, piece of baggage, basically, for gamers who whose initial experiences dated back into say the 70s and 80s.
Atlassian style
Definitely, like carry that.
GMing
Exactly right. That
is
kind of
very much out of style these days.
Right, exactly. So I think
But
fewer and fewer people are kind of like being, subjected to, like the whims of an angry GM kind of thing, and the idea that it's the GM's job to, to oppose the players as
Mhm.
opposed to, presenting them with challenges. So.
it is mostly going the way of the dinosaur, but D&D recently released a hardcover adventure called The Wild Beyond the Witchlight, which is set in the Feywild, no, it's the fairy realms of D&D. And they expressly designed it that you can go through the entire adventure without any combat.
Mhm.
And it was the first time that they did that. And
Fascinating.
now, if you want to dive in and, of course, just try and slaughter everything in your face, you can. But it was designed that combat was absolutely unnecessary to achieve the final goals. And a lot of people are embracing it, but there's still the howls. And even from some younger people are like, what do you mean there's no combat? It's not a game then.
Can we
And that's
blame
just such a
video games for
limited
that?
perspective.
Can
Yeah.
we blame
Right.
video games for the fact that we're expected to have to defeat enemies and get XPs and treasure and level up? Is it now the problem of the Zelda games and Mass Effect series rather than D&D that is the culprit behind this? I don't know. I don't know who we blame.
Well,
It's tough,
even
actually.
once again, even without combat, though, there are still potential pass-fail situations in any game, right? Like, did I successfully climb over that wall? Did I sneak past the guard or whatever, right? Like, those are still in and of themselves occasionally set up to be pass-fail mini games, basically within the larger structure of the game. So I think the teasing out all of the appearances of pass fail as a setup, even within the storiest of story games, is still a thing that is uh, uh, a fraught discussion, right? Like, can these things actually be separated from each other, and still still require the use of game at all, of the term game at all. So.
Fair enough. Well,
Oh, I was
go
going
ahead,
to say,
Beth.
and then you have the games that are kind of a hybrid to it, such as Sentinels or Cortex or things like that, where the pass-fail conditions are a bit blurry because maybe you sort of succeeded on what you're trying to do, but it wasn't a full success, so there's a drawback. Or on the flip side, you kind of failed, but you're going to get a benefit from it. And so that kind of blurs the line between pass fail and adds more of an open-ended story element to it that I really enjoy because it's not quite so black and white.
All right. Let's talk about the other side of that
Mhm.
coin for a little while now. Let's talk about the benefits of pass-fail play and what you get from that. In my mind, the greatest advantage of pass-fail play is its clarity. It provides clear goals, clear stakes, clear rules, clear choices for players who need to know where they stand and can't bear to feel lost at sea without a sense of what they're supposed to be doing or where they're supposed to be going. This can be a life preserver. Um, I've had, generally speaking, the biggest obstacle that I've had to contend with new players in open-ended games is what am I supposed to do? This sense of panic it's as though they have to make a public speech or improvise something in front of a crowd, which is kind of what they're doing.
Mhm.
Um, the clarity of being able to say, okay, so you've got 5 cards in your hand, you choose one, which matches the color or the number on this one, and you put it on top. Um, that clarity and the sense that there is going to be a definite conclusion where you've either won or you've lost can provide a great deal of comfort to players who are feeling a bit uncomfortable in this space, who are new to games, or haven't played since they were little and didn't know to be afraid of failing. I think that there's a sort of an evil alchemy that happens as we grow up through our social interactions and our schooling and so on, which tells us that it's not okay to mess up. And the and providing that clear structure where if you lose, well, it's fine. It's just a game.
Right.
Can be easier to contend with than a situation where you have to be a person in an imaginary world that you're not necessarily all that familiar with, or you have to just decide for yourself what's right and wrong, what's good and bad, what's success and failure. And that can be a lot of responsibility. And sometimes we want to be irresponsible when we're playing.
Mhm.
Can either of you speak to some of the
I think there's a competitive like portion of this that is kind of the primary source of entertainment for that kind of game, right? Like there is and I think it's simplistic to just say, oh, this is just me proving that I'm better than you or something, right? To like have some kind of like
people like that shouldn't
desire.
play pass-fail games.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
like
Exactly.
terrible
Well.
to
Yeah.
play with.
Exactly. Or I don't want to play with them anyway when they're doing
Me
it.
neither.
But I've Beth has heard me say this before. I play poker a great deal, and I don't like playing poker with amateurs for cheap or no money because they don't take it seriously, right? Because the potential negative hit to you from failing goes away, which deforms the game. It causes people to behave ridiculously, to play poorly because the outcomes of the decisions that they make carry no weight, have no circumstance, right? So for most people, I much prefer to play for an amount of money that makes them take it seriously. For gamers, for the most part, for my gaming society of friends, many of my friends, if you tell them paper clips are worth something for the duration of this game, they'll kill and die to get to paper clips, right? Like, I mean, that's the whole point of the game, right? So I will always play poker for M&Ms or whatever with gamers as long as they kind of like have that sense of, for this period, this decision matters, right? And like what I'm trying to do matters on a level that is, I think, difficult for people who don't have a gaming background to kind of understand or get their heads around.
The necessary playful state you have to get into for a sort of game where you, I define playfulness as trying sincerely to succeed while at the same time being comfortable with the possibility that you might fail.
Sure.
To
Yes.
me, those are the two necessary conditions to have fun playing any game. But the path to getting there seems to vary based on the kind of game you're playing. And in a poker game, the stakes need to be appropriate for that player to get to a place where they are going to make a sincere attempt to succeed.
Right.
And getting somebody to try playing Lady Blackbird for the first time, by contrast, may require a different process to get them into that place because of what is or is not at stake, and because how it will or will not end with victory or loss for the
them
players.
feel like their decisions carry some weight one way or the other. Right.
Exactly.
Regardless of whether it comes at the end to a pass-fail conclusion, the process of making weighty decisions one way or the other, I think, is in fact intrinsic to games, as opposed to whether or not there is a win-loss condition.
Yeah,
right. Like I think part of the definition of game is the fact that I am engaged in an activity that has structure, that has like rules to it, and the decisions that I make will in fact will affect the outcome. Right. As long as I'm doing that, then I'm playing a game. Right.
Yeah, it's
Snakes
a
and
social
Ladders
contract.
isn't a game?
What's that?
Is Snakes and Ladders a game? Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. You. Yes, it could be. No, absolutely, it could be, as long as the people who are playing who care about it. Absolutely.
Even though there's no
I mean,
decisions.
yes, you may have to, there is always that point, like that you reach at a certain age when you realize that your decisions don't actually matter. That, like the cards basically will determine everything that happens in it. But up until you reach that point, then you are still invested in everything that happens to you. So.
Beth, do you have any particular advantages that you've found in introducing new people to games that that tend to occur with pass-fail play? Any advantages you can leverage in that style?
It depends upon a little bit of their background. So if they're used to, I hate using the word conventional games, but the games that they're going to run into, or their definition of games they're going to run into in the our world, as opposed to the wide plethora that we actually have in the game industry.
I tend to call them Walmart games.
Yeah, and I even feel kind of bad about calling it that, because there's some good
kind
games
of
there too.
classist.
It is.
Yeah.
But that's okay, right?
Yeah. But their society very much tells people that if there's a game, there is a clear winner and there's a clear loser. That's what, unfortunately, our current society at large tends to say.
I agree.
So those people do have a tendency to do a little better with pass fail, and you have to kind of coax them over, or maybe not even coax them, but open their eyes to a different way of playing. So that is the one good thing, which is they're kind of used to that. They're used to, oh, my baseball team won or lost. The concept of that there's a game where, it's more fuzzy, it's not quite as clear cut, and it is open ended, or like with the Fiasco, where you can both, win and lose, at the same
Where
time.
the goal is to lose, right? Yeah.
Yeah, or play.
The
Yeah,
goal is
exactly.
to
Or
lose
play two.
spectacularly, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I win by having
That's
the most outrageous failures.
that's kind of the core of the argument that I was making at the beginning for this, right?
Mhm.
Even Fiasco has a winning condition, and the winning condition is an entertaining disaster of a story.
Yep.
Right. And so if we as a group worked together and told an entertaining disaster of a story, then we won, right? Like by
Mhm.
any sense, regardless of whether there was any other kind of like movement toward a winning condition or something that could be like defined as a victory. The victory was the evening that we spent and the hilarious stories that it will generate from things like going on. Those are the rewards. And the winning state is, was this fun? Was this a good story? Right.
Right.
And I think that's we were talking earlier. I mentioned that this is an argument that, like, was debated ferociously on the Forge
Mm.
about whether or not story games as a group suffered anything from using the word games, because it lent the idea to people that there was in fact additional connotations to the term beyond the idea of like, oh, all we are doing is getting together and telling a story.
Right. It created
Right.
the expectation of an experience more like.
Exactly right, but that's the philological answer to that was, well, but that is in fact what you're doing, right? Like if you successfully get to a story, then you have in fact succeeded. But then that led to the question of like, well, then did we lose if like the story didn't come out so well, right? Like if people at the table weren't terribly happy with it, did they lose? That's kind of like a tough thing to once again to define, right? Like it's does that matter? Is anybody keeping track, or are we just going to try to do better next time? Sort of thing. So
I feel like there's a stigma attached to the idea of losing that does a great disservice to pass-fail games in a lot
mhm,
of ways.
yes,
In a story game, and again, an open-ended game, the expectation is that, yeah, if we enjoyed the story, it was fun. If we had a good time, it was fun. But I think somehow people have a more difficult time applying that same principle to pass-fail games, and they
right,
will see themselves as failures personally if they weren't able to win at, I don't know, quantum or something,
right.
because they failed, and that can be something that can be very destructive to people's enjoyment of games. And what you were saying earlier, I think, about common perceptions, public perceptions of what games are. You take a look at the games that most commonly appear in popular media, that get articles in newspapers. They come in three categories: high stakes poker, professional sports,
Mhm,
and reality TV shows. And in all three of those are all pass-fail games. And in all three of them, the penalty for losing is not just, oh, well, I lost, but it was still fun. If you play badly in professional poker, you can lose your role. If you play
mhm.
badly in a professional baseball game, you can lose your job. If you play badly in a reality TV show, you can be the laughing stock of the internet.
Sure.
But
Again, I would say that certainly for the latter two of those examples, um, there's some kind of like question about who exactly is playing, right? At
mm,
that point, right? Like if you're talking about a professional sports team, sure, the games themselves have winners and losers, right? But the teams are owned by like wealthy business people who are going to win one way or the other as long as their team makes money, right? Like whether or not the Red Sox win the World Series or not is not entirely relevant to the owner of the Red Sox, right? Like the owner of the Red Sox is concerned about how many tickets he's selling to the park, right? So I mean, that's
absolutely true. I would argue that that's probably not how most sports fans see things, though. They're just going
well,
to root for their
that's
home team. They're going to root
sure,
for their favorites, and they're going to see the stakes of those games as being very, very serious. And the players, too,
sure.
are going to see the stakes of those games as being so serious that they cannot afford to lose. Losing is death.
Absolutely correct, and I'm saying like I want us to look at it, like at a kind of like a deeper question for that, because um the decisions that are made by the ownership that are based on whether or not they are winning or losing the game that they're playing, right?
Mm,
Which is a game that is basically being measured in dollars, not in points, right? Are going to affect the outcomes of the games that are based on points, right? Like, I mean, like the quality of the team that you're going to produce, the quality of the park that you're playing in, et cetera, et cetera. All of these decisions are impacted by the outside game that is, kind of like not happening. But it's entirely possible for all of those guys to win, right? Like all 30 owners of Major League Baseball teams are all winning right now because baseball is insanely profitable. And the actual outcomes of the games that happen, the things that the fans and the audience are looking at, are being directly impacted by the fact that there is a 30 person team, a 30-person game that is happening that has right now 30 winners, right? It's basically like playing a co-op game for them, right? Like, so
In a sense, yes. It's in a lot of ways, though. I find that it doesn't actually seem like all that much fun, particularly if you lose.
yeah.
It's so serious, and the stakes are so high that it seems hard to imagine why anybody who wasn't approaching it from a purely professional standpoint, where they're trying to make a living, not necessarily have a good time, would engage in that, would play that. Whereas, in order for the kinds of games that we're talking about here to be fun, people have to come to it expecting to enjoy them.
Right.
And
I was going to say, I think an aspect of it is, and I almost hate using the word ego because it's so kind of fraught with psychological baggage. But I think it depends upon what your ego attaches to for what gives it validation and what it feels rewarding. Because I've been related to some people who get so mad when their professional sports team loses. You cannot talk to them for days. That they are that invested or that, oh my God, my team did not win that game. And it wasn't even like a playoff game or anything like that. But somehow they attach their identity to that winning or losing state, over which, by the way, in this case, they have zero control because they're not a player. It's just the team they root for. Whereas I think a different type of player is more about the process. And so they don't care if it's win, lose, whatever, so long as the process is fun. And I think most people fall in a spectrum of these, attitudes. But they're very invested in the win, lose. I think that's an aspect of it, of that, it's propping up their identity when they win.
Right.
When you're dealing with a new player who is very, very, what's the word? Very, very loss avoidant. Very, very concerned with the possibility of not losing, not being seen to lose. What sort of approach do you think is more useful for helping them to enjoy games and play? A pass-fail approach or an open-ended approach, generally speaking? Or can you make generalizations about this?
I think it may depend upon the person. I don't know. What do you two think?
I think, well, specifically for people, I think, who are loss avoidant for it, they probably don't have a great deal of experience with open-ended games, right? Like I think loss avoidance is a tactic, or like is a thing that is a trait, I guess, that is shared by people with less experience with games at all, right? Like if you've sat down and played, like a week's worth of board games at a convention, right? Well, it's like, okay, well, I won 5 times and I lost 10 times or whatever kind of thing. Like the fact that, like all of that experience together added up to a fun weekend, right? Like each individual loss becomes much less important. You're just like, well, damn, I'm going to have to, like you can get over them quickly because there's another game coming up in 20 minutes, right? Like you don't have to live with that loss and have that seep into your personal self-image because we got to go play another one right now, kind of thing. So I think there is a level at which you can kind of almost, what's the term for somebody, the exposure therapy, right? No, I say like exposure therapy to your phobia, right? Kind of thing of like, if you can kind of like manage somebody's interactions with their losses, and kind of like help them see that like no individual loss is that important, and frankly, no individual win is that important either, right? That is something that you can help somebody get over. And I'm not sure that necessarily story games in that case, or that open-ended games, are necessarily going to assist. They're not going to improve that situation. They may not make it worse, right? Like if they sit down and just play a bunch of open-ended games and never feel the experience of losing, well, then they've avoided the thing that bugs them, and congratulations, good for you. but that thing is still going to bug them every time that they do encounter a win-loss situation. Whereas
Which is going
actually
to
playing,
happen in their
which is going
open-ended
to happen
games.
in your life, right? Like exactly in many things. Whereas I think if you can kind of like manage their interaction with pass-fail games, I think that's probably the only reliable way that I'm aware of to kind of get over that. And I'm saying this obviously in full, I am not a psychiatrist. Please do not, attribute any weight to what I'm saying beyond just experience of dealing with new players. So
do either of you think that maybe getting them into cooperative games may also be a bridge to help gain them over?
Exactly right. Yeah, I was going to bring that up as kind of like the next topic. If you can get them into, if you're introducing them to games, and especially if you are introducing them to board games or something like that, where they have not been exposed to anything more sophisticated than Monopoly and Sorry, and Monopoly probably played wrong in the first place. But you can instead introduce them to something like Pandemic, where it's okay. The entire table is basically playing against the game, right? Then then any win or loss is shared at the table, right? And so like if we have that experience as a group, it may help them overcome their individual problem with a loss because, well, like all six of us lost. But the game won, the board won, kind of thing.
That can also backfire on you sometimes, particularly
it probably can.
If you get somebody who really needs to win playing a cooperative game, that is prime territory for the so-called alpha player problem or quarterbacking. Ruin the experience for everybody. If somebody really, really needs to win and is invested in that and feels that they have that their identity as a person has to do with not letting the stupid game beat them, then there's a good chance that they may end up telling the other players what to do and getting very upset when they don't.
Right.
My approach, rather than co-op games, would be to go with games that have a mix of hidden and open information. So it's not possible to always make all the correct decisions because you don't have access to all the information that you need to do it. In particular, there's a principle I call Schrodinger's mad skills that is basically a player's capacity to own their successes and say, yes, that's because of something that I did, and disown their failures and say, well, that was just luck. There are certain kinds of games that have a mix of skill and luck, hidden and open information, that makes it easy for players to do that. To basically deny responsibility for the stuff that went wrong, saying, well, that was just bad luck, but still be able to take credit for the stuff that they did right, for the good decisions that they made. And that is, to my mind, the best way of doing this. I did a video recently about Ink and Gold and how that game makes it so easy to just take credit for everything that you do well and absolve yourself of everything that you did poorly while providing something that is a substantial game, but too substantial. That's the sort of thing that I would bring up too.
That's probably I think that's probably a tremendously healthy way to do it. Once again, depending on the circumstances, that is a notorious way for poker players to lose a lot of money, right? Is to to assume that like all of their victories came from their skills and all of their losses came from bad luck or whatever is precisely the way to take a large amount of money and turn it into a small amount of money at a poker table. So.
Well, imagine
once again, that's not necessarily the same circumstance as somebody who is actually just trying to get into a healthier relationship with games as a concept. So that's
as opposed to a fish showing up at a high stakes game.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. So.
Right. So we've covered a lot of really interesting things. Let's see what others. All right. One of the problems that I've run into sometimes with introducing people who are used to playing video games or pass-fail games to the world of role-playing is that sense of being lost at sea. Beth, you mentioned earlier about how the earliest games we played, playing House, playing Cops and Robbers, are open-ended in nature, and as little kids, this is my way of seeing it, we didn't know to be afraid yet. At that point. We had not yet been taught to fear the punishment that comes when we make a mistake. I recently had the experience of introducing somebody who just said, I can't do role-playing games. And the game that we played was Lady Blackbird, and she did have a very good time with it. And I found that the tactic that worked most for that was whenever she started to kind of do that, you've seen that look, I'm sure. I would offer her 2 or 3 options, things that her character might do. And I also mentioned to her at the very start, and had her write on a piece of paper, it is always okay to ask, what does my character know about this situation?
Hmm.
Those are the two tools that I used to help her to feel more comfortable outside her comfort zone in an open-ended play state. They
Hmm.
did seem to work pretty well, but we can always use more tools. What sort of approaches have you been able to take with people who kind of feel adrift, feel in need of direction in a pass-fail situation to help them get comfortable and enjoy themselves?
Um, if it's a role-playing game as opposed to a board game,
An open-ended
um,
game of any
yeah,
kind.
what I've tended to do is if I can, because actually I had this experience. I prior, actually it wasn't in Metatopia; it was a different double exposure convention, but with somebody who never played a role playing game before, never ever ever did have any concept of it, never even heard of D&D, but was willing to try, and I was able to relate it to movies, to basically say, hey, so this game is set in this genre. Have you ever seen? It was kind of amusing because I had to go pretty far down the genre list before I found one of those that had been seen as well.
Hmm.
But being able to relate it to that and then to be able to extrapolate out and say, okay, so in this scenario, you're a spy like James Bond, but you don't do it all. You have a team. That's the people you're playing with. So one of you it'll be the action guy, and one of you will be the good talker, and one of you will be this. And that helped to, because what you're describing with the person with Lady Blackbird, it sounds like they had a bit of overwhelmed situation. So again, kind of related to
Making
something that
on the
they've seen
spot,
in,
improvising on the spot, that was the issue.
Right.
Nothing
Yeah.
to do with genre conventions.
yeah,
Very much not knowing what to do and feeling
exactly.
nervous about that.
Yeah, and that's the thing. If you can tie it to something they're familiar with in pop culture and
Hmm.
scale it down, not really to take away options, but to take away the overwhelm of options.
Hmm.
I find
Right.
that
The
then they can
paralysis
latch on to
analysis
things.
of I could do anything and therefore I don't know what to do at all. Right. Yeah.
Exactly, and that was where that was actually, considered that game a huge win for me because I took this person who had no clue what a role-playing game was, and within about 45 minutes of play, they stopped responding with, "Well, I think my character would," and start responding with, "I'm going to," and you could
Right.
tell
Right.
that they had gotten hooked into a role-playing games.
Right. I think you're absolutely right. I think that's the joy of genre within a fictional game in the first place, right? The extent to which you can, kind of like tie it to a shared experience, tie it to a familiar experience, where they, even if they don't know that they know this consciously,
Mhm,
subconsciously they know what the rules are. Right, they know how a detective is supposed to behave in a like noir game. They know how a crewman on the Enterprise is supposed to, like interact with the other crewmen on the Enterprise or the weird aliens that they meet, right? Like
mhm,
it's in many ways it's the whole point of having a genre.
mhm,
The problem then comes when you hit something that is that the genre is not necessarily as immediately obvious or
right,
is not something that's immediately familiar. Lady Blackbird is a wonderful, wonderful game, but it does. Uh, it has a very kind of like unique and peculiar point of view. Like as a genre story, there are a great many people who have never encountered a story quite like it just in their background reading or anything, right? So teaching them the rules of that, right, like of how the universe is going to work, sometimes becomes a more complicated thing, and maybe you want to start them with something if they're brand new. And you see this problem. Lady Blackbird is a great game to introduce the right people to, but if it's somebody who is having a lot of trouble kind of like grasping the idea of like creating and inhabiting a character, it might be easier to do it within a genre that they're comfortable with. And so, like you said, taking your person through and saying, okay, what's your favorite kind of movie? What's your favorite kind of TV show? What's your favorite kind of book to read? And finding them a game that's close to that might be the easiest, anyway, the path of least resistance to getting them comfortable with the problem. And then you can kind of show them, the more beautifully daffy kinds of things like Lady Blackbird.
The one of the things that I found useful as well is bringing in and leveraging real-world knowledge within a game.
Hmm.
Any game, any open-ended game that you set in the real world, the contemporary world of today, immediately gives everybody a leg up on it
Sure.
because they know stuff about the real world. A trick that I used in creating the introductory B&D module that I used at Stormcrow was that I made all of the player characters siblings. And the way that you choose your character is by, okay, here's the first child. They have always had to be the responsible one, and they maybe feel a little bit resentful about that. Here's the second child, who always feels like they have something to prove about being good enough. Here are the twins.
Right.
Here's the baby, who's the most emotionally available. The fact that even the only children in the group know what family dynamics are immediately gave them a hook that they could use.
Yep.
And yes, it's open-ended and stuff, but they know how siblings are together. They know how this works, and that enabled them to use each other as a sort of a touchstone, for grappling with this strange fantasy world that, I mean, they've never heard of Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings, but they understand about families,
Right.
and so that became something they were able to use. Even when things are very open-ended, if the situation is familiar, then that leaves people a lot less adrift and more like in a more familiar situation. It is unfamiliarity, I think, that is the major stumbling block for open-ended play. All right. Well, we've got about 20 minutes left. We could put it to some questions.
I was going to say, if you like, we could see what's in the chat here.
Yeah, that sounds like a great idea. Mickey, can you hear us? We're listening to Mickey on the other end, our wonderful technical director, and we're going to see if we can find some questions from the chat about this. Earlier on, sorry, we can hear what's going on there, but our audience can't. You find general social states like character role-playing goals motivate well in open-ended play.
Can you repeat the question again? Sorry.
Could you repeat the question for me, please, Mickey? Do you find general social states like character role-playing motivate well in open-ended play?
Right. So being handed a character type or something, being handed
and a goal,
crafted, and a goal of the character
for your particular character to accomplish, which I guess makes it more of a pass-fail type of circumstance. Because I mean, for example, in the Aliens RPG, often it's made into a sort of a social deduction game where each player has possibly a secret identity and a secret motivation, which they have to accomplish in order to win. And that RPG does very much have a pass-fail sort of feel to it.
Sure.
Do you find that in your, I've never actually run that game. For those of you who've had experience or heard stories about it running, do you find that that introducing those elements of specific player goals makes it provides useful direction in that open-ended state and brings in some of the advantages of pass-fail play, or is it an unhappy marriage?
I think having those goals assigned to a character, having those kind of like additional winning conditions, right? Like this is going to work out best for you if your character can like arrange this sort of shenanigans behind the scene or something. I think it does work when it matches the genre of the game, right? I think that's a genre feature. Not all genres have it. Not all genres need it or want it or find it productive. Right, but like a game in which we're doing an espionage game where it's kind of like expected that half of the group are going to be, double agents who are secretly doing something else, behind. Like we'd be disappointed not to have that, right? And so it'd be less satisfying. Yeah, it'd be a less satisfying. Exactly, if I'm doing a Game of Thrones type game or something, and our families are not all, trying to betray each other or something, it wouldn't feel right. Right, so that is certainly a way to kind of enhance and underline genre. We were joking earlier when we were talking about setting up this panel that there are many RPGs, honestly, that like the mechanic is in fact fail. Right, there is no quality outcome. Fiasco would be one of them. Any of the Call of Cthulhu games or Trail of Cthulhu or something, right? Like where the goal is to to live heroically and to sacrifice yourself in the name of like preserving humanity, but knowing that in the end there is no chance that nobody is going to succeed, nobody's getting out of here alive, is key to that genre. So I don't think that is a piece of advice that works across genres, but I think it works spectacularly well in the genres that it's fit for.
I can tell you one experience that I've had, or at least one of the other games that I tend to run a lot at Stormcrow is this piece of nonsense. Um,
Sure.
I offered as an option. We're going to party like it's 1979.
Right.
This is the meat grinder. This is the old school D&D experience where you're expected to get killed several times. This module has a mortality rate when I run it of about 115%.
Exactly
And I
right. Yeah.
tell that to players up front before they decide that they want to play it.
hmm
And this is something where sometimes the group will TPK themselves.
Exactly right.
And they wind up going through with these gleeful grins on their
I was going to
faces.
say survival is not the pass fail of the it is not the winning condition. The paranoia is the game that kind of like codified that, right? Of like, we're telling you at the beginning of the game, if you die, and you're going to die multiple times, you have an infinite number of clones behind you that will just come along and pick up the role and carry on the story after you,
Yeah,
right?
a
Like, so
similar rule
therefore,
with
once again, like like not dying entertainingly is the fail condition of the game, right?
exactly.
So
We had a similar thing in this. It takes like 5 minutes to make a D&D basic character. So the
hmm
rule is if you get killed, here's another character sheet as
is
soon as
another
you have
character.
another one made.
Exactly right.
Back in.
Yep. Absolutely.
Old game, maybe labeling it as goals is not 100% accurate. But there's old RPG called It Came from the Late Show.
hmm
Remember that game?
Um,
Yep.
yeah, I
It was a
love
very,
that
very
game.
meta game that I got to play where you could like storm off the set and hide in your trailer because you don't want to get in this. The distinction between the actor and the character in the horror movie was very fuzzy at times.
Oh yeah, it's a lot of fun. But one of the things they do in that game is that your actor is given certain things to achieve as the character that they're playing, and they're not so much like I said. Labeling of goals is probably a little inaccurate, but it's like I had one where I was playing a Chara type character, and I had to speak gibberish that people still sort of understood. And another one I had to work into my play as often as possible her catchphrase, which was "chicky chicky boom boom," and so it was goals, kind of, but it's not about you have to win, you have to object. It's
Right.
about working this into play, and that's an idea I've been kind of playing with as far as something to give people sort of a hook, because
Right. It's a reward mechanism. It's not really a pass
right,
fail situation so much
right.
of it's like like there's there's one of the rules, part of the structure along the way is this kind of like meta knowledge of, oh yes, I have to work, it's like doing a Top Chef or something, right? Like
Mhm.
it's like you have a set of ingredients that you need to work into the story before, and if you successfully get them all into the story, well, that's the winning condition, right?
I
So,
feel like this is the sort of thing that you can bring back to
Mhm.
pass-fail style board games as well, because if you've failed spectacularly and had fun doing it,
Mhm.
and that sets a precedent. You realize, well,
Right.
okay, maybe I can play chess and have a good time with that, even if I'm losing, even though
Sure.
chess seems like this very serious sort of thing.
Right. Or
Right.
something like where you can have the awesome shared story of like the tremendous beating that you took playing
Mhm.
Pandemic as a group, right? Of like, it's
Mhm.
like, oh, we destroyed the entire planet in
We
two
got
turns.
so
We were
owned,
we
yeah.
were so terrible. Yeah, we were so owned by it. So
Yep.
that's still rewarding. A friend of mine has a story game RPG that it's a horror movie. It's a slasher film genre for this, and going in of the players at the table that one of you will be the final girl. We don't know which of you. We're going to determine that in the story, but at the end, the final girl will win, right? Like she will be the one who gets away, and the rest of us will all die horribly. And we're going to determine that by whoever is the last one standing is in fact the final girl and gets a final scene in which they overcome the slasher or whatever. So once again, that's that kind of like a funnel mechanic of everybody else here is going to die, and we all understood that when we started, right? And that's just part of the fun. So and then we'll have a lovely 5 minute closure basically of a final scene where the one of us who like by sheer luck was the last one standing gets to show how they've overcome the terror that like we've all been facing. So
It looks like the cross-pollination can indeed work both ways, that experience with open-ended games where things go terribly can prepare you psychologically for things to go badly in a pass-fail
in a
game.
pass fail,
And,
yes,
and
right.
losing a whole lot of pass-fail games and also losing a lot of them and getting accustomed to that can make you feel less worried about messing up playing a character in an open-ended game where you're
Right.
expected to just sort of make your own identity, make your
I think
own
that's absolutely true. Once again, it's one of the things I was saying at the beginning. I think it's a to a certain extent it's a false dichotomy. They are both just elements. Whether something is pass fail or open ended is not kind of like the core division between games, right? So.
So, Beth, you have to be in another panel in about 10 minutes. Do you need to go, or can you stick with us for another 5 minutes of Q&A?
I can stick with you for another 5 minutes. Yes.
Okay.
Terrific. Nick, you got
Mickey, hit
anything
us.
else for us? Very good.
Do you have any more
Anything else in
questions
the
for us?
chat?
Oh, that's the only one that we
Okay.
got? Okay. Okay. Well,
I guess that means we've just done our job altogether too well here, folks. We're too good.
sorry, we over-explained your problem.
We did. We've passed. This is a pass-fail situation. We thought it was going to be open-ended, but it turns out, nope, we won. We just won. Killed it.
Exactly.
But I think it is really good for game designers to not look at it as either or that, well, I only design this, and just consider them tools in a toolbox, and that they're tools that may interplay.
Right. The most recent pass-fail game that I made, like I said, is based on We Rate Dogs. And if you're unfamiliar with the premise of the Twitter account, it is the Twitter account. You send a picture of your dog to Matt Nelson, the guy who actually runs the site, and he says some comedy thing about your dog and then rates them out of 10.
So this is hot or not for dogs?
It is, except that part of the premise being that because all dogs are awesome, a dog cannot get less than 11 out of 10. That's the minimum score. And then that it goes up from there. So the point of our game was that, like all dogs are awesome, just some dogs are slightly more awesome than others, right? And so like the entire structure of the game is around kind of like overloading your character with your piece, the dog that you're entering in the competition, with superlatives to the point that like even among this collection of like the most awesome winning dogs like in the world, your dog somehow was like the super winner. Right, so it was a pass game, but there was like different levels of passing. Basically, was the version of it. Nobody ever loses. The only way that you can score less than 10 out of 10 in the game is for another player to secretly reveal that your character is in fact not a dog at all, but a hippo that snuck into the competition. And that's the single like losing condition of the game. Otherwise, everybody wins. So.
I mentioned Fog of Love earlier on. This is a board game about a relationship between two people. And what I find most bold and fascinating about the design in this game is its approach to victory and loss. Because there are certain things that are going to be true or false by the end of the story. Either your character and your partner's character will be satisfied in the relationship or unsatisfied in the relationship, and either you will break up or you will stay together. Those could be thought of as pass-fail states, but none of that, at no point in the game, in the rules or anywhere in the components, does it ever mention winning or losing.
Right.
It's a game that has a distinct resolution that comes to a conclusion in which it's up to you to determine who won and who lost.
Right.
And I find
if anybody did,
fascinating.
Yeah.
It's very much sort of a in some ways a possible training ground for coming into games and not necessarily looking to win or lose, but just to experience it.
And for understanding the story game, the RPG concept of play to find out, right? So it's
Let's see, nothing else in the chat for us, Mickey?
No problem.
All right.
And I think I was gonna say let's.
Sure.
I think we're ready.
All right. So let's finish by once again telling us where we can find you, where you can find your work, what projects you're most interested in, and what you're most looking forward to at this point. Beth, do you want to take us out?
You can find me at NWorld, and my handle there is BRIMM as in Mary, EL, S as in Sam. You'll find me reviewing the D&D releases, but I also review indie games and then do other interviews, articles, and so forth. And then you can also find me on Twitter. I have multiple Twitter accounts. The two that are relevant for here is at Beth Rimmels, RIMMELS. And then the Twitter account that is all about games all the time is awesome, the number 8 followed by the letter S, RPG. So you can find me there, and
Anything
other
coming
stuff
up that we
maybe
should
coming
watch out
soon.
for?
I was going to say maybe some stuff coming soon, but not ready to, yet to be announced. So
Okay, so we'll have to watch your Twitter feed then to
yes,
kind of catch those.
Fair cop.
yes.
Thank you. Your turn, Darren.
I'm Darren Watts. I am on Twitter and at Darren Watts 27. I am Howland Owl on Discord, and I am all over the Double Exposure Discord accounts because I am the panel and seminar track manager for double exposure conventions, including this one. And you can find my work in a bunch of different RPGs. I am currently, at long last, finishing an epic project with Greater Than Games for the Sentinels of the Multiverse role-playing game that I have every hope at long last is going to come out this spring. Right, exactly. And I have a podcast about comic book history called Explain This Comics Guys, and that's at explainthis.podbean.com.
Nice. I've been Joan Moriarity. I am a games mistress. I teach games at Snakes and Lattes in Toronto. I typically work there on Fridays, so if you'd like to come in and try your hand at some games and discover what does and doesn't work for you, you can find me there. You can find me on, I'm not supposed to interact with people on Twitter because it's apparently bad for me. My therapist says I'm not supposed to do that, but you can still message me there if you need to get hold of me. It's J Games Mistress. My main project at this point is the YouTube channel, Joan the Games Mistress. We'll see if we can put the link in the description to that channel. Again, YouTube will try to tell you that Games Mistress is 2 words. This is a lie. Games Mistress is 1 word. And the whole purpose of that channel is to reach 2 kinds of people who are curious about modern games but find the idea of playing them a little intimidating, find the space maybe a little unwelcoming. And 2, people who've been playing and loving these things for years and find that it's often very difficult to bring people from group number 1 into the fold to be able to have a good time. It's all about providing the tools that you need to use things like the magic circle, the play contract, and all these very, very complicated, jargony sounding things, and bringing them down to something that everybody can use to make their time playing games more fun.
Excellent and worthy.
Thank you both so much for being here with me. Thank you all for watching. I hope that this has helped provide you with some information that you'll be able to use to make your games more enjoyable and to bring more people in and help them have a better time at play. Take care, everyone.
Absolutely.